Hello, everybody, and welcome to another JordanCon interview. I have today with me Christine Amsden, who is an award-winning fantasy and science fiction novelist whose work includes the popular Cassie Scott series. At the age of 16, Christine was diagnosed with Stargardt's disease, a condition that affects the retina and can cause a loss of central vision. She's now legally blind, but has not let that slow her down in the least. In addition to writing, Christine is a freelance developmental copy editor as well as a political activist. Hello, Christine.
Hi.
Hi,
Nice to
welcome.
see you.
Oh my God, it's Christine! So, you're coming to JordanCon, and this, I honestly, I don't know what a developmental copy editor is.
It's developmental editing and copy editing. They're two different types of editing.
Okay. Without someone being like a layman, myself, what is that other than what a person would normally imagine as an editor? Is that like what's the
This breaks down the editing into the stages of the editing process.
okay?
And let me also clarify that I'm not an acquisitions editor. I am not the person you send your short stories to and hope to get accepted, but probably get rejected.
This sounds like a something that has come up in the past.
Yes. When I talk about developmental editing, I am talking about big picture story editing. I'm looking at character, plot, world building, motivations.
Okay.
Genre fit actually is one thing that comes up when you look at the top level of the story. And because I do this freelance, I'm working directly for an author. They're usually going to be self-publishing. Sometimes they're looking for an agent, but I want to help them meet their goals. My goal as the developmental editor is to help them tell the story they want to tell, which may or may not be exactly the one that's on the page at the moment.
Fair enough. That's a feat.
It is, and I have a lot of fun doing developmental editing. It's a creative form of editing. There's a lot of communication and back and forth. Well, I perceived this. What do you think about this? I don't want to make that change. Well, how about this one instead? And you have a conversation.
Yeah, you get to like play inside of other authors' worlds, as it were.
And that's where you can really make a difference to an author's work, not just an individual work too, but across their career. I've worked with authors across multiple books, and it's fun to see them improve and grow. Then, of course, there's line and content editing, which gets into smaller scale stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say blue eyes in chapter 1 and brown eyes in chapter 10?
Yeah.
Did you misspell their name once? And little character motivation problems and things. And copy editing is the 3 C's: clarity, consistency, and correctness. That'll be your last pass before a proofread.
Okay, cool. That's pretty cool. I didn't have that understanding for the developmental editing. That sounds actually like a lot of fun. Like, because if you're doing it for multiple authors, it's almost like, I don't want to say you're helping write, but you could be part of the building of all of these different worlds essentially, and that sounds like a lot of fun.
A little bit. It's not a ghostwriter though. A ghostwriter is something different.
Yeah, no. Like more just dangling your toes in the water of almost.
Mm-hmm.
So as I saw in your bio, and I mentioned just a minute ago, you also said that you were a political activist. So has that influenced your writing at all, or even maybe your editing endeavors or anything like that?
Well, with the editing, I have to be very careful not to let my personal opinions get in the way of the story the author is trying to tell. So that sometimes requires me to do a personal check my own opinions at the door. With my writing, I feel a little freer to let my ideas trickle in there. I write character-centered stories, so I don't tend to write these bigger world-changing, event-driven stories,
Okay.
which means that when I'm putting politics in, it's usually as a side note. So there'll be a little environmental activism. I'm trying, especially lately, to include more diversity in my cast of characters.
Okay.
And I am agent shopping a book right now, which after the 2020 election cycle, and after the COVID darkness, I felt like I just wanted to write a story that was more hopeful and that was a little less divisive. So it is about 2 very different souls sharing one body and having to work together. And that was inspired by my experiences, but not directly political, I wouldn't say.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool. Is there a name that you can drop or?
Not of Souls.
Oh, that's
Watch
pretty
for
cool.
it.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds really cool. That's something that's currently in the pipeline, possibly coming out. Is there anything that you want to mention? Maybe some of your works that the readers could
Absolutely.
maybe pick up before the convention, or
The Cassie Scott series, starting with Cassie Scott, Paranormal Detective, and the para is crossed out. It's about the only normal member of a magical family, and it has 7 books in the series. The I will say the first 4 books are sort of a complete arc, and then I wrote spin-offs.
okay, cool. That sounds like fun. I love like those. Not that I'm saying that your book is like this, but I love those kind of monster of the week, detective noir type stuff. Like those
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of fun. Is that an accurate representation or?
It's not really. I don't think noir is the right, but it's urban fantasy,
I
and
love
it
urban
has the
fantasy. Yeah.
detective, and it's yeah.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. I don't know what attracts me to it. I've never been interested in being a detective or anything, but those types of
No,
stories are always a ton of fun.
but it's fun. I was heavily influenced, I think, by Jim Butcher. If that
Yep, I love Harry Dresden. I love that series so much. It's exactly where my mind went when you mentioned detective.
mhm.
That's a great series. Okay, so let's see. You had also mentioned in your application an interest in sitting on the Wheel of Time panel. So this
Mhm.
being JordanCon, I
Right.
would I would take that to mean that you're possibly a fan of the Wheel of Time.
Possibly, I might have read some of the books more than once, especially the early ones.
That's fair. I've done maybe the first like 9, like I don't even know, like uncountable amount of times. But the more as we get more recent, I did my rereads before the new books came out. But
Right.
it's like I think A Memory of Light I've read maybe like 2 or 3 times, and whereas like those first 9 is I don't even know. I can't even count them.
Mhm. The
Um,
last trilogy I did only read once. I will say the final trilogy. I'm just at once for that
yeah,
one.
I mean, like when you started, I would have. Were you reading, like early when you were younger, or?
I started in college, which has been a while for me now.
Yeah, well, I was gonna speak for myself, but I'm sure it's similar in your circumstance too. It's like when you start reading them 20 years ago, almost, it's
Hmm.
like you have a little bit more time on hand to read those types of books, especially writing your own. I'm sure that takes up a lot of time. And forget about the editing and everything. So from the books, then, is there any particular character or scene or anything like that stands out to you, just as like, oh, that you can like nerd out about with our fellow Wheel of Time nuts at JordanCon?
My favorite character is Egwene, and I don't know exactly why. I think that I like that she kind of started out small and became stronger as the series went on,
Mm-hmm.
and really grew to be more than you would expect. I I have to admit that part of the reason I only read the last few books once was a little bit because of how she was handled in the end. I didn't I didn't love her fate, but it was fair. It was fair, but I didn't love her fate. When I started rereading the first book with my son just recently
That's awesome.
because the series came out on TV,
Yeah.
and I'm remembering some of these early scenes. I loved the scene in the woods in the very first book where Rand is talking to his father, the man he thinks is his father,
Yes.
and it really set the tone for that series. And watching Rand, kind of grow and become his insanity was so well described.
Yeah. Very. His
Gradual descent.
descent. Yeah. His
Yes, it was. It
yeah.
was one of my favorite things about the books.
Me too. Um, so if Egwene, so as Egwene, like we'll go back to Egwene for a second.
Sure.
Have you watched the show?
Yes, I have. I've watched the whole thing now.
Me too. I
What's
I,
available?
I loved it. The what do you how do you what are your feelings on the character of Egwene from book to show?
I still like her in the show.
Me too.
I think that it's a slightly different take on her. Their relationship in the show uh, seems more solid from the beginning than
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it maybe was in the book. In the books, of course, they were younger, and it was like this new love, like I've never even considered anyone else.
Yeah.
Whereas when they moved it to the show, they were older characters and they seemed promised to each other, and I thought that was an interesting new take. I will say Nynaeve, who all that braid tugging kind of pulled, was a little prickly in the books, but she in the TV show, I liked her better.
Me too.
I
A
liked
hundred
her better
percent.
in the show.
I actually really like what they did with Nynaeve and Egwene in the show, specifically with their character development. Specifically, Nynaeve too is like, and with the braid tugging, they kind of gave the braid tugging meaning, like a
Hmm.
like a social deeper meaning than like, because it always felt like in the books Nynaeve was using it as like a security blanket, like as a
Hmm.
look, I have a braid, this means I'm a woman and I'm in charge of things and you should listen to me. Like every time when she would get angry or insecure, she would grab it. Whereas in the show, they were like, when you grab the braid, think of the women that came before you, and all the women took hand in doing the braid. So you're thinking of the women that did the braiding, and like they'll give you strength. And I feel like that's more. I don't know. It's just it's a stronger character development part than it was just like as a nervous tick.
I will say, as a woman, I felt that there were female writers in the show,
That's-
and I appreciated it.
well, that's well put. Well put. Yes. I think Jordan did a great job
Yes.
writing most of his characters, but I mean, yeah, I mean, he's bound by what he is. Like, it's
Hmm.
hard to write from a point of view when you've never lived it. So yeah, no,
Oh,
100%.
sure. I have trouble writing men, so I get it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm sure he did his research and everything that he could
Hmm.
do, but it's never going to be the same. I mean, not an author myself, so I can't speak like that. But like, I can't speak to that 100%. But I would just assume. So any specific, just to nerd out with fellow Wheel of Time,
Oh, sure.
us fellow Wheel of Time nuts, like I said, is there any specific thing about the show that you really enjoyed that you like to mention? Maybe Rafe will be watching.
You know, so one of the things that I really liked is something that a lot of people that I've been talking to disliked. In that very first episode,
Mm-hmm.
in the battle scene, I liked the friendly fire incident. I was shocked by it, but I thought it was daring and courageous and really set up Perrin's character journey
Mm-hmm.
in a way that maybe is going to be deeper than in the books. In the early books in particular, until he found Fael, I didn't feel like there was a whole lot to him. It was the wolves and then it was Fael. But now I feel like maybe there's going to be more to him because he's going to bring that pain into the story.
I 100% agree with you. 100 for that exact reason. You said it perfectly. It's like they gave his ambivalence to violence, like the way he was always like, I don't want to be violent, I'm trying to be gentle, but
Yes.
a meaning now, instead of just like I want to be nice to people, it's like I'm afraid like of violence because of this thing that happened. And yeah, no,
Hmm.
I really like what they did with that. The only negative thing is, to do that appropriately, they had to do exactly what they did, which was kind of like make Perrin's character like be in mourning, or really be absorbing that tragedy, that trauma. So like he's not going to be very useful in this first season because he's going to be still traumatized,
No,
which they did pretty well. Like,
that's true. But I I didn't have any trouble in my own mind just feeling what
oh
he
no,
was
me
feeling
either.
through the whole season, and that quiet mourning worked well for
Oh,
me,
it was
even
so
if he
great.
didn't speak about it very much.
No.
Especially, he couldn't have spoken about it.
No,
Who could have?
mine was just out of a lamenting of that means we got a little less Marcus Rutherford, and I really just wanted to see more of his acting and stuff, because I think he's a great pick for the role. All right, so if before we to finish up our Wheel of Time ness, if you were in the world of the Wheel of Time, and you could see yourself as one of the characters, like even if it's just one of like not one of the written characters, but you yourself in the world, would you be a member of a specific faction? Would you have specific abilities? Have you ever thought about that before?
I have, and I would be an Aes Sedai of the Brown Aja, just because I'm bookish. I just
Okay,
it feels like it fits.
that's perfect. So in your bio, and as I mentioned earlier, you had these experiences at a very young age, 16, I believe it was, about having that disease that caused you to lose some of your vision.
Mhm.
Do you feel like those experiences influenced your writing in any way, or?
Well, it's impossible to not for your life not to influence your writing, and specifically how it did it, I might never know exactly, but I will say an interesting thing that happened when I was younger. I always loved to read, and I started writing when I started writing pretty regularly from 6th grade. So before I got this diagnosis, but I was an impatient child. And when I read, I would skip to my favorite parts and I would focus more on the dialogue than anything else. Once I started losing my central vision, for a few years, I didn't read anything that wasn't assigned to me by a teacher, and I didn't write anything. And I was going through a mourning process, you know?
Yeah.
And afterwards, I finally got over myself and started listening to books on audio, which are just a lot easier and more joyful for me to read. And it also forced me to slow down and listen to the whole book. And I think bizarrely that helped me. And maybe I would have learned to do that anyway. I mean, I would have had to, because I have personally read, amateur works that read more like a screenplay than a book where it's just dialogue. And I do love a good dialogue-centered conflict, but you need the rest of that to build the emotion and the conflict in the scene and the world and everything else. So it helped me become a better writer because it forced me to slow down and listen.
That's a good point. And I really love how the audiobooks have really stepped up, availability.
Right. When I first started on audiobooks, I could only get them through the National Library for the Blind.
Yep.
And now I can get them on Audible, although the National Library for the Blind gets a lot of Audible books too. So
that's great. That's really good. The I'll call back to earlier when you mentioned Butcher. I love the audiobooks for Butcher's series. James Marsden's is amazing.
I haven't read them. My husband and I read those together, so I let him read them to me.
Well, that is amazing. That's so awesome. My wife and I also both read Butcher, but I don't know if she would want to sit there and let me read to her. But she also doesn't need me to. So, but if you ever do get a chance and you want to explore the Butcher audiobooks, they are amazing. Who knew James Marsden's Spike from Buffy? If you don't know who he is.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. I bet he would be good now that you've put a face to that.
Who knew he was a voice actor? Like, he does all these accents, and it's really amazing.
Okay, now you've got me curious. I have to check him out.
Yeah, it's really good. That's what I mean when I'm saying, like, these audiobooks have really stepped up their game. Have you listened to The Wheel of Time on audio?
Yes, I've exclusively, actually.
Perfect. Yeah. So Kate and Michael they're actually a husband and wife team. Their voice acting also within the story is great, but James Marsden's is like just amazing. Like, who wouldn't have thought, knew? Like, honestly, like, I didn't know that he was this amazing voice actor. Is there anything else about your experiences with this disease and since and writing that you maybe would want to speak toward anyone who might be facing similar situations? Or
the only thing I would say is, especially to people who are new to it, and I'm going to talk about specifically the degenerative aspect of the condition, which is that when you have a degenerative condition, there is a mourning process that you have to revisit when you continue to lose things. For instance, I was recently speaking to someone with the exact same eye condition as me. She'd been dealing with it for years and she suddenly couldn't drive anymore. And I told her, there's nothing good about that. There's nothing okay about that. You've got to mourn that loss because the world isn't kind to non-drivers.
Yeah.
But you will get through it. I told her, you will get through it because you're a strong and capable person and you have to. So don't be afraid to reach out to people for community, for support, and for help, and be forgiving to yourself.
That's a great thing to think of. To be forgiving to yourself is something that I need to think about quite often. Mm-hmm. All right, so to wrap these up, I've been doing a kind of like a bit. I don't know if you've ever seen Inside the Actor Studio. Mm-hmm. So for those who haven't, there's the late great James Lipton, who is an acting teacher, I believe, and he, with his class, he would do. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Ooh, hiccups. The late great James Lipton, with his acting class, would do this set of, like, he would interview actors, and then at the end of each interview he would do a set of questions, and it was always these same questions. So I've taken some of those questions and pared them down a bit, so we're not asking like 10 or 15 questions to everybody in addition to the rest of the interview, but the ones that I thought that were kind of fun. So I've been doing that with each of our interviewees. So the first one is, what is your favorite word?
Nuance.
That's a good one. What is your least favorite word?
Breath, but only when you really mean breathe.
Okay. What is the first thing that you notice about another person?
Their voice.
Your profession, other than your own, any if you have a day job or being an author or editor, is there any other profession that you would want to attempt?
I seriously considered counseling or therapy in college, and I think it would still be nice.
That's a special kind of person who can do those things. So I commend you even for thinking about it. And is there any specific profession that you could think of that you would never want to attempt?
Athletics, any of it.
I feel you. And your favorite curse word?
Forking shirt balls. I love the good place.
Me too. I love it. I love that you said that. They're my favorite curse substitutes in any out of any, even the Wheel of Time. They're some of my favorite ones. Well, thank you, Christine. If you want to find more out about Christine, you can look her up at christineamsden.com, which I'm sure will be linked either above, below, adjacent to, somewhere around this video, I promise. And her author page will also be linked below, which is a Facebook author page. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun chatting with you.